two-part session, and the first half hour of our conversation tonight will be with Frances Koncilja. And then at about the half-hour mark, Andrew Lang and Sam Krage will be joining us for a continuation of discussion about the impact of Black Hills and the possibilities for a new public power utility on our business community. When it comes to the ongoing election in Pueblo to decide whether to leave Black Hills Energy and form a public power utility, no one supporting the effort knows more about Black Hills Energy than Frances Koncilja, a commissioner from the Public Utilities Commission, Colorado Public Utilities Commission, whose term just ended in March. And this is a conversation that many of us have been waiting a long time to have, to really get Frances's candid assessment of Black Hills and of the transition that we're going through at this point. She spent the last 4 years defending Puebloans against what she calls a rogue utility that is predatory and or incompetent. And she's urging Puebloans to vote for 2A on their ballot. Frances Koncilja was born and educated in Pueblo until she went to law school. She's a former president of the Colorado Bar, one of the founding mothers of the Colorado Women's Bar, as well as a former deputy public defender and assistant U.S. attorney. She also served as a state fair commissioner appointed by former Governor Roy Romer, and she's a former member of the Economic Development Commission appointed by Speaker Ferrandino, as well as a former member of the Lottery Commission. So Frances, welcome, and we're so happy to have you here tonight. I'm very excited about this conversation. I'll invite you to just jump in and make some statements to kick things off, but let me offer one kind of introductory thought to kind of get us going here. Why are Black Hills Energy's electric rates in Pueblo so high?
Well, there are a couple of reasons. You have to go back to the history in 2007 when they first acquired Aquila. That was a bad deal from day one. And it's continued to be a bad deal. In fact, Pueblo opposed the transaction. The Office of Consumer Counsel opposed it, and trial staff opposed it. And they told the commissioners to deny the application. And they said, in the alternative, if you're going to grant it, put these guardrails on. And unfortunately, that commission, I was not on it at the time, granted the application, put a few of the guardrails on, but not as many as they should have. And so what happened is we all knew, or everyone knew at the time, that the power purchase agreement was going to expire. And the commission did tell them to come up with a plan to replace it. They did what they have always done, is they gamed the system. They delayed, because they didn't want another power purchase agreement. They wanted to own generation. Because the way you make money and profit for your shareholders is if you own the generation. And so finally, the commission let them build a new plant. And then Clean Air, Clean Jobs came in. And my God, they used that with a vengeance if you go back and look at the history. And they replaced the coal plants with new gas plants. And unfortunately, that statute let them do it without competitive bidding. So once again, they owned it. Now, where I do fault the commission is at some point they should have figured out what was going on. And it's not much more complicated, Dave, than the numerator and the denominator. As long as you keep letting them build more stuff that they're earning a rate of return on, which is the numerator, and the denominator stays the same, which is the usage and the number of customers, the per unit cost goes up. And that's why it has gone up. And then it becomes a vicious cycle that you can't get economic development because people would rather move to Colorado Springs, not to Pueblo.
The public interest. But earlier on, between 2008 and 2012, it felt like the PUC was not protecting the public interest. It felt like there was capitulation to the company's requests. Can you explain a little bit about that balancing act that the commission has to undertake, and how you feel like it has played out in the case of Black Hills?
Well, regulation of utilities is very complicated and it is very challenging. And I think 10 years ago, there was the attitude that you leave the utilities on their own to run things and you don't get too involved and you trust them. Unfortunately, that didn't work with Black Hills. I mean, Black Hills is the only utility, I think, that the Public Utilities Commission has admonished their chief regulatory officer twice in the last 4 years for lying to us. And so when you have a rogue utility that's willing to lie to the commission, you get bad results. And I think it took the commission a while to understand that you just couldn't trust them because, in my opinion, they're the energizer vampire. You can't beat them down. They're always out there moving around. During the day, they look sweet and cuddly. Something happens at night when they go back to their office and they figure out every blood-sucking way they can take a dime out of the community. And what is offensive to me is that they do it to small communities, rural communities that don't have as much money. And the other thing that goes on at the commission is they have limited staff. There's 3 commissioners, there's a huge amount of work. Not all commissioners in the past, quite frankly, have been diligent and or knowledgeable. It's challenging if you want to do it right. You have to work hard and you have to read a lot. And I think in the past, not all commissioners were like that. Some commissioners have political agendas, others work hard. And the commission has a small staff, 98 people to help the commission make decisions in the area of transportation, telecom, railroad, electric and gas utilities. And so if you have a rogue utility, it is very hard to keep track of them. And quite frankly, the attention is always going to go to public service because they've got 1.5 million ratepayers.
Mm-hmm. So Black Hills is not just behaving the same way that all investor-owned utilities behave. Is that what you're saying?
Sweet Jesus, no. Sweet Jesus, no. I have been stunned at the shenanigans they have pulled just in the 4 years I was on the commission. I wrote in the Chieftain about the cost of debt. Everyone knows interest rates have been low. Colorado ratepayers, especially Pueblo ratepayers in the Black Hills Service Territory, have not benefited from those low rates. Cost of gas has been next to nothing. Pueblo's not benefited from that. And the way they allocate the cost of debt is they get it at the corporate level and then they decide who's going to bear the cost. Fascinating, and I can't tell you what the numbers are because they're confidential. Fascinating. The lowest cost debt goes to their unregulated entities, which is ridiculous because unregulated entities are riskier than utilities, but that's what they do. Atmos does not issue debt for each individual affiliate entity under them, but they average the cost of debt. So Black Hills does stuff that no other utility's done. I will also say in the 4 years I was on the commission, I saw public service pull back on taking every dollar for themselves. For example, on the Colorado Energy Plan, which is what was used by public service to close Comanche 1 and 2, the coal plants. When the commission said to them, you have to go out to competitive bid to see the replacement generation, the competitive bids came in and third parties bid much lower than public service on a lot of things. Public service did not fight the commission. They awarded the bids to the lowest cost. Black Hills would never have done that. We've been litigating with them for years. The other thing that people in Pueblo, I think, may not understand is what public service did to keep EVRAs in your community, my community. And quite frankly, some of the stuff they do is stunning. And it's just hard to keep track of them. They wear you out, which is why Pueblo should create its own utility. You don't have to keep track of them. You don't have to hire lawyers to track them down and see what they're taking. And you don't have to worry who's sitting on the commission. I mean, I'm the first person that any governor appointed that commission from Southern Colorado. I think first ever. There might have been somebody from Trinidad in the 50s. And once they realized that I was going to protect ratepayers as well as be sensitive to the needs of the utility, they went after me and moved to disqualify me.
Mm-hmm. Well,
so you cannot trust them.
The Energizer Vampire. Great tagline.
Yes.
Well, so this is a nice segue. Do you think that the Pueblo Board of Waterworks really is capable of setting up and managing a professional and reliable electric utility in the public?
Yes, absolutely no question. And you, what annoys me, galls me, and quite frankly pisses me off is the implication that Pueblo's a group of rubes and can't run an electric utility. Number one, I would put Black Hills up against the Board of Waterworks, and Board of Waterworks would get higher grades than Black Hills. Black Hills is not a great utility. They make mistakes and dumbass decisions all the time. And the Board of Waterworks is very thoughtful, and you've got some of the lowest rates there. So, and I've seen their ads. I mean, they create the false impression that the Board of Waterworks is risky. They're not risky. It's staying with Black Hills that is risky. You know, the other thing I've seen them do is to say, oh my God, Boulder had a hard time and it's been 10 years. And if Boulder can't do it, Pueblo can't do it. Because, you know, everybody in Boulder is much smarter than people in Pueblo. Well, that's not true. Boulder made numerous decisions that were not supported by the law. They took on fights they didn't need to, and they lost them at the Boulder District Court and the Court of Appeals. That's what cost them years and hundreds of thousands of dollars. I think the Board of Waterworks is smarter than the folks in Boulder, and I think they will have learned from their mistakes. You know, in this bit about the guys from South Dakota, the, you know, Energizer vampires being so competent, I can't even begin to tell you the errors there are in their data. They ignore rules. They ignore the commission's orders. Their head regulatory officer has lied under oath several times, and at the commission, we had admonished him when I was there. I don't think they're a particularly competent electric utility. And I can share some other stories with you, but what they are experts is creating value for their shareholders. Since they have been in Pueblo, their stock prices have almost doubled. And they brag that they have brought back dividends, substantial dividends for shareholders every quarter for the last 12 years. And they've done that on the backs of poor people, let's remember. I mean, keep in mind that Pueblo has a high poverty rate. I think, and I pulled some statistics out, let me get my glasses on. Pueblo has 2 times as many people living in poverty than is the statewide average. Statewide average is 10.3%, Pueblo's 18.2%. At the same time, Pueblo residents use less electricity, 619 kilowatt hours a month on average. That is a really low electric usage. And that puts Pueblo residents on average with households around the country that have less than $20,000 in annual income. So Pueblo residents on average are poorer than the rest of the state. They use much less electricity, but they're paying higher rates, 30% more than Colorado Springs. How does this make sense? And why would you stay with Black Hills? You know, one of the things that was really heartbreaking to me was read the comments that regular citizens would submit to the PUC at various times. And I remember one, an elderly single woman in Pueblo, a widow, who was living in a high crime neighborhood, who was afraid at night, but she wouldn't keep her outdoor lights on because she wanted to keep her electric bills down. Another one wrote and told us that she didn't want to make cookies for her grandkids because she didn't want to run the electric oven. Another one told us that she would get sick in the summer because she didn't want to put her air conditioner on. So I've got no idea why a majority of the city council is backing these Energizer vampires. And quite frankly, what annoys me is that none of them called to ask my opinion. I have been on the front lines for 4 years. I know where the bodies are buried. I've got scars to show it. And the fact, and I went off the commission March 13th, I didn't get one phone call to say, former Commissioner Koncilja, what do you think? Because I would have told them. And the other people I'm real disappointed in are these high-priced lobbyists. I'm not going to name their names, but you and I know who they are. Some of them are from Pueblo. Some of them grew up outside of Pueblo. I would count some of them as my friends. But they, you should ask them how many pieces of silver they got for turning their backs on poor people. And the Pueblo that I grew up in, when they saw these wealthy lobbyists, we would have chased them down the street with pitchforks. So I don't expect people in Pueblo to do that. I think you've gotten a little more civilized. But next time you see those lobbyists, ask them what their hourly rate was. Ask them how much money they've made and tell them how bitterly disappointed you are. And ask them if their Judas silver was worth the price of selling out their principles. I didn't sell mine out. My brothers haven't sold theirs out, but a couple of those people are real disappointing to me.
Well, that's great. That's quite a testimonial. Well, you mentioned you've got some stories that that you could tell. Would you care to take a minute and share one?
Oh, yes. Let's see. Let's talk about the phase 2 case you were talking about. The interesting thing about phase 1, phase 2 is only Colorado has phase 1, phase 2. Phase 1 is we tell them how much money they can get. Phase 2, we tell them who's going to pay the rates. It's the rate design. But by the time you get to phase 2, it's a zero-sum game, because if somebody's rates go down, somebody's have to go up. And in the phase 2 rate case, and there was a period of about 2 years where I couldn't get done as much as I wanted because Commissioner Moser was on the commission. And Commissioner Moser, by the way, when she was the general counsel for Black Hills, threatened to sue the commission if they did not allow Black Hills to build more generation. I have someplace in my files her 11-page letter that goes through an excoriating detail about what Black Hills is going to do to the commission if the commission didn't let them build more generation that they would own. So somehow she gets appointed to the commission. In my opinion, she didn't read stuff a lot of the times, or her questions indicated she didn't. But once you know how you're going to rule, you don't have to read stuff, Dave. And the one that I couldn't fix, because she was sitting on the commission giving lip service to worrying about ratepayers in Pueblo, which used to gall me, but I had to not choke on the bench, is the lighting, the street lighting. Do you remember that in the phase 2?
Absolutely.
That alone should have persuaded the city council to vote in favor of 2A. I think Pueblo paid $5.25 million to convert the street lighting to LEDs. They then transferred the ownership to Black Hills for $1 in return for Black Hills' promise that the energy costs would be low and Pueblo would pay only for the energy costs. Well, when they get to the phase 2 case, they say to Pueblo, gosh, we made a mistake. Those energy costs aren't going to be reduced. They're going to go up by $861,000 because we made one mistake. And we also forgot to tell you we want a return on our investment for the poles, the wires, and the arms on the poles. And at the same time, they used that reduction in energy because Pueblo reduced its kilowatt hour usage, $9 million for over 2 years, to argue that they've met state energy goals. I mean, that kind of double dealing is stunning to me, but Moser was on the commission. I couldn't get a reliable vote to fix that, but that's one of those that killed me. Let's talk about the economic development, because they brought their high-priced lobbyists who dangled little, glass beads in front of Pueblo, and Pueblo's gotten all excited about the economic development. What have they produced? Not one thing. Riverwalk, they came in and they promised they were going to do this, they were going to do that. They haven't invested any of their own money. And in one of the meetings I had with them, I said to them, you want Riverwalk to go, why don't you put $150 million of your money into it? Well, we can't do that. I said, well, you and I know it's going to go no place. Why are you even wasting everyone's time? Let's talk about the economic development tariff, which was the other one that just stunned me. The legislature changed the statute and said that not all rates had to be equal. A utility could have an economic development tariff, but it was under certain conditions. So they came in 2018 and 2019, and they wanted expedited ruling on this economic development tariff. And the administrative law judge conducted a hearing. Well, it was a bogus deal. They kept telling people they were going to get $100 million worth of benefits there. This was Bitcoin mining. And I think the principal in the company was Alexandra von Hell. I fooled me not. The registered agent's address was a rental house with unmowed lawn in Stapleton. That was their economic development tariff, and I voted against it. And they wouldn't even commit that it was going to be renewable energy. Now, I know the contract they entered into, but I can't tell you that. But you ask them next time you see them what it did, what that contract did to clean up the grid. Zilch. And the commission did put some rings around that. So the loss that they suffered, they're going to have to pay for, I hope. But buried into that economic development tariff application was this little tiny request asking the commission to clarify a statute that was not ambiguous. And the clarification was going to take away all the protections that the legislature had given to ratepayers. I mean, it's stunning that they would pull that. It's stunning that they thought I was stupid enough to go along with that, or that the other two commissioners were. But that's what they do. So at the end of the day, for 2 years, they've been bragging about all the economic development. They've been dangling these trinkets in front of city council and all the community people. They even got Catholic Services to say how great. And the union, this economic development tariff for Alexandra von Hell to run this business. And it has produced zero, zilch, nada, niente. There has not been one bit of economic development committee. So that's why I get a little frustrated and a little annoyed and a little passionate that they keep pulling this. I have to watch my language because, you know, they're such snowflakes. I didn't realize this. One of the reasons they used to disqualify me is I used the word turd in the public hearing. I had no idea that oil and gas roughnecks would be such snowflakes. So I try not to use turds or bullshit. So let's say that all I saw from them were horse biscuits.
Well, and you know, on the economic development rate, the question in many of our minds was, why can't that rate apply to our existing industries? And why does this have to be, you know, held up as just this one company to begin with? It really looked like a piece of unfairness for our existing, you know, economic situation.
Well, that gets back to your question about why are the rates so high? It's the way the cost of service is done. And once they come in and they say, this is my cost of debt, this is my return on equity that I want, these are the expenses, these are the indirect costs, the commission under a cost of service approach, hands are tied, which is why you've got to dig through. And I will say the trial staff has been diligent in digging through. Commission has not always followed trial staff's recommendations. And one of my concerns with me not being there is if the trial staff is just going to get demoralized, because, you know, they keep making recommendations to the commission. And recently in the gas case, the commission rejected their 9% return on equity, gave them 9.2, I think. But, you know, there's only so many times that staff are going to keep going to the well if the commissioners don't accept them.
Don't accept it. Yeah. Well, let's as we kind of transition into the second half of our program tonight, let me ask you a visioning question. So what do you think the day after the election looks like for Pueblo if we do vote in favor of 2A and for public power?
You know, and this again is where I fault city council, because all they're doing is focusing on the problems and some of these false problems. If Pueblo votes on May 4th, is that the date, or 5th?
Yeah.
In favor of municipalization, that day is going to put Pueblo on the map nationally. That's going to be a game changer for Pueblo. That's going to be the day that Pueblo becomes known not just for being a steel production city, but for wind, solar, battery, storage, and taking control of its own destiny, without worrying what the political agenda of the Denver Commission is, without worrying what the political agenda of the governor is going to be, who he wants to be friends with, who he wants to piss off. Pueblo will control its own destiny. You will be able to attract businesses because this will be a game changer. You can create courses at the university and the community college to talk about an efficient grid, the resiliency of a grid with renewable energies, all of these things. And quite frankly, what City Council ought to be doing is getting behind this, coming up with a new logo, a new name for Pueblo. Do you want to be called Supercharged, Sun City? I mean, you will be able to do something big and important in my hometown, as opposed to begging Black Hills to do a rate freeze, as opposed to bringing in call center jobs, which are minimum wage. I mean, this is Pueblo's opportunity at greatness. And I'm just stunned that not everybody has figured this out.
Well, thank you. Wow, that's an exciting vision, an exciting comment, and one that many of us have been actually dreaming about now for some years. Well, let's add to the conversation, add some richness. So also with us tonight, and I'll invite both of you gentlemen to unmute and join the party. We have Andrew Lang and Sam Krage. And so Andrew is the Chief Operating Officer at TR Toppers, a Pueblo-based national food processing and distribution company. He relocated here from Chicago in 2001 with his wife and 2 daughters to be the general manager for Eaton Assembly Plant. Since then, he's been involved in many community organizations, including PEDCO as a previous chairman and current board member, CSU Pueblo's Hassan School of Business Advisory Board, District 60 as a strategic plan facilitator, Southern Colorado Manufacturing Group, PEDCO Foundation Board, and he was the chair of that, Greater Pueblo Chamber of Commerce Board, United Way Mentoring Board, and campaign chairman, as well as a number of other community organizations as well. So welcome, Andrew. And also with us tonight is Sam Krage. Sam is the founder and CEO of Krage Manufacturing, established in 2000. Krage Manufacturing is a result of 150 years of family entrepreneurs. And the time I got to tour the plant, I got to see a lot of this heritage there, and it's a wonderful connection. 5 generations now in heavy construction and manufacturing, dating back to the 1980s, have provided the foundation and the can-do atmosphere at Krage. Krage Manufacturing, with 50 exceptional employees still in operation during the virus, and a state-of-the-art facility, specializes in custom metal products and electrical assemblies in the energy, construction, utilities, and climate control industries. So gentlemen, would you like to jump in with just kind of an introduction and an opening statement? And Andrew, we turn to you first.
Sure, Dave. Yeah, thanks a lot. And really enjoyed sitting here listening to Francis and learned some new things. And I too got to meet Alexandria Von Hell, and that thing smelled rotten from the beginning, and nothing came out of it. But I think from a business standpoint, there's some real key points here. And when I look at the facts, it just makes sense that we vote for municipalization and vote for 2A. At home, I'm paying electric rates that are 40% higher than they should be. And at TR Toppers, we're paying rates that are 77% higher than other industrial users in the state. And, I got a letter about 3 or 4 weeks ago from Black Hills. We did as a company that said, congratulations, you're in the top 20 users group, which is not something that you really want to brag about. But I think a lot about what the company could do, what it could invest in, the jobs we could add, the way we could grow the business if we were paying a competitive electric rate with the company. So I'll leave my introduction to that, and I'm glad to be part of it tonight. And let Sam say a few words.
Great, thank you. Sam, would you like to jump in?
Well, yeah, I just want to correct you. It was the 1880s that the family started the business, came over from Sweden and Denmark. So it's been a little bit more, about 150 years. So yeah, I'd like to thank you for letting me participate in this. And Francis, that was a great talk. And your experience with the PUC is invaluable. And for myself, I came here 25 years ago, got recruited by a company that Pedco recruited across the highway from street here. I started my business in 2000, right in front of the steel mill. And then in 2005, we moved out here to the industrial park. I bought a building out there, but it was in 2012 as a small business owner, we got to really watch our costs just like everybody else, but especially a new startup. But in 2012, when Black Hills Energy fired on the gas plant just north of us, our rates went up 41% overnight. And that kind of sent us scrambling because that was a huge bump for us. And the electrical cost is about 80% of our utilities. So that's the biggest share of it. So we went through a number of gyrations to try to reduce that. So I'm excited about this potential 2A, that we can get a yes vote on it because the opportunities are huge. And I've been involved with many different things in the community, and including economic development. And that was a big stopper for many companies once they saw the rates. You can talk about how cheap the water is and how cheap the gas is, but when 80% of your utility bill is electrical, it's hard to talk around that. So I'm excited about this, and hopefully we can get everybody else on board.
Yeah, absolutely. I just want to remind our viewers that that if you will enter any questions that you might have of our panelists into the chat on Facebook Live, they will get to me, and I'll make an effort to interject these questions and keep them on the table. So this is an interactive session. And I also want to invite all three of you to jump in, Francis too, and build this kind of as a conversation. So in the filings from Black Hills to the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, the number of industrial customers has dropped from 90 in 2009 when the company took over to 56 in 2018. The company claims that some of this drop comes from their 2010 reclassification of customers into different rate classes. But I just wonder, do you know if there has been a substantial exodus of industrial customers from the Black Hills service territory? And do you think that this is directly attributable to the rates? And please jump in, anyone.
Dave, I don't know if it's been a reduction or if they are correct, it's because of a reclassification, since I start off with being very cynical and not believing anything they say. I would want them to produce a list. They won't do that because they will tell you customer names are confidential, but customers can waive that at any point. But it makes sense to me that there are fewer industrial customers because the rates are so high. And when I sat on the Economic Development Commission for the state, I tried to get businesses to go down to Pueblo, and a number of them said to me, why would we go down there? Because the electric rates are so high. We can go to Colorado Springs right across the border and it's cheaper. And that's what I mean, this vicious circle. They build more, the rates get higher, then the usage is down. People can't pay for the rates, and then the rates keep going up. It is the most insane business model that I have ever seen, but it works for them.
I can say on the ground with manufacturers, everybody's trying to reduce electrical usage because of the rates are so high. And some of the things that we've done that I imagine a lot of people have is we've, staggered the starts of our air conditioners so they don't start, no more than 30 minutes apart, because we get hit by demand charge, which is a spike in our electricity. That's actually 60% of our bill. So we staggered the starts of our air conditioners. We staggered the starts of our air compressors. We shifted our start time to 5 a.m. so we could not have to worry about the air conditioning until about noon, because we could cool off the plant, keep it cool until then. And then we automatically have all our air handlers turn on at 1 a.m. so we can recycle the air inside the plant so we can get that cool desert or air from outside the facility and replace it with the hot air inside the plant. We put some huge fans in the building, in the ceilings. We put portable swamp coolers. So we've done a lot of stuff to try to mitigate this price increase. And in the end, we ended up replacing our compressors. We actually turned the air conditioners off in the shop because of this, and because it was tough to keep the doors shut. But by shifting the schedule to 5 a.m., we kind of helped fix that issue. getting out before the heat of the day. So a lot of manufacturers probably have the same story of what they've done to try to reduce the consumption of electricity.
Yeah, I think I could chime in there. I started with TR toppers in 2010, so just after really Black Hills came on the scene and started jacking rates up. And in that time, and like Sam said, we've done things like LED lighting throughout the facility, motion sensors for lighting, so we're not using electricity in areas where there are no people. But we're also a business that has 40,000 square feet or so of freezer space. And so we've got a huge compressor load on that. And so in the time that I've been there, we've almost doubled in our square footage, but the electric rates are now 3 to 4 times the amount. So, you look at it and you think, taking all those steps with lighting and everything else, and a lot of the space we've added hasn't added a lot of electrical load either. So it just kind of illustrates the point how what a burden it is on businesses that are already here in Pueblo. It's very significant.
Well, and those demand charges have been a problem. And the way they trigger the demand charges and the fact that they stay in existence, it's almost like catch me. They catch you and then they hold on to you for 12 months. And one of the things the commission tried to do in that last phase 2 rate case was to modify some of those demand charges. But whenever you deal with Black Hills, they would say to the commission, whatever you do to us must be revenue neutral. And I said to them, why? Where is it tattooed on somebody's wrist that they have to pay you all this money? But they go, well, we can't do this. We can't do demand side management. It has to be revenue neutral, meaning they get a guarantee is what they're asking for. I mean, it is offensive to me. But I couldn't
Andrew
fix all of
and
it.
Sam, were those changes in the demand charges effective for you? Did they make a difference in your bills when after the phase 2 rate case was passed in 2018?
Well, I can say that, like I said earlier, we went up 41%, and then they came across what if you said in 2018, and we probably had a 5% reduction. So we did have a reduction, but it wasn't substantial. So we were hoping for much more. And for all the manufacturers in the industry and hospitals, that demand charge is huge. And like I said, it's 60% of the bill. And at my work here, we had about 45 manufacturers, distributors, business owners for a couple meetings here before this COVID virus hit to talk about, the rates that we're paying here in Pueblo. And I can't speak for all of them, but I would say, I would guess that 95% are furious at the rates that they're paying and that are going to vote for 2A. It was overwhelming. And there was maybe a few that weren't, but that's their prerogative. But, we're all in the same boat, and they're all trying to shave, electricity costs like we all are trying to do in the industrial sector.
Yeah, I would agree with that, Dave. The demand charge for us has been, cut slightly, but it's still over 50% of the bill. And in the way we're set up, when we have dozens and dozens and dozens of compressors loads, it's pretty hard to stagger them. Plus freezers are made that, a lot of those run for 20 hours plus a day. So it's a little hard for us to be able to try to, change our system to affect the demand charges in a public way, in a good way. So.
What about renewable energy? What about a solar system behind the meter, perhaps coupled with storage and some demand control technology? Do you feel like is that a robust strategy that could counteract the policies of Black Hills if it were widely implemented?
Well, I can say that we've looked at solar, and we're continuing to look at solar. It makes a lot of sense, I think, for residential customers, but for industrial, like Andrew's talking about with the freezers running and all the compressors, and we have equipment that runs all night long with lasers and punch presses, automatic equipment that runs. We've looked at the solar, and the payback maybe would be 6 or 7 years, which is probably pretty good. but it's kind of interesting. One of the people that is actually pushing the solar that we're quite serious with, he said that the two hotbeds in the country are California and Pueblo. And that's not a compliment. The reason that Pueblo is such a hotbed is because our rates are so high and our payback would be so much quicker. So, for sure we'd love to go solar, but it just doesn't make economical sense in what we're doing right now.
Yeah, we're in the same boat. We've looked at it, but to really have the power you need during the day, you can bring solar in to shave that peak demand off and try to affect those demand charges. But to really do it, you need a battery system as well as the solar panels, and then that pushes out that return, that payback time. So it's something we've looked at. We looked at it with a company a few years ago that went bankrupt. We'll probably take another look at it again, but it's certainly not a quick fix that would bring us immediate relief.
I see. Well, both of you guys, Andrew and Sam, have been active leaders in PEDCO. Could you talk to us for a few minutes about how the electric rates factor into the incentive packages that PEDCO puts together for new potential recruits? I guess what I'm wondering is it the elephant in the room in conversations with prospects, or is that too strong a statement for how electric rates actually factor into the attractiveness of a move to Pueblo?
Well, I think it can be the elephant in the room. As Sam said, some of it depends on the usage profile, but if it's a manufacturing company, they're going to be using a lot of electricity, and it's significant. When we're looking at bringing new companies to Pueblo, companies are looking for a number of things. They're looking for, quality of life. They're looking for workforce. They're looking for low utility rates. They're looking for a place that has, you can build a plant, the local building department's on board, the city and zoning are on board, and they're friendly towards business. A place where their kids can go to school and get a good education, and on and on. But I think however you shuffle that deck, electric utility rates are always in the top 10. So yeah, we've seen companies where it's a problem. But the other thing we talk about is that we don't know how many times that we don't even get a prospect. And I think it goes to what Francis says, from a state level, they made, usually a company hires a site selector and they're out looking at 50 or 100 locations, and the site selector, in the initial phase, all they want to do is cross places off the list because they want to get it down to some manageable number of places to actually take a look at. And so, if you score poorly in 3 or 4 of those top 10, qualities, you don't even get a look. And so that's one of those things that we really don't know. How many times does the electric rates, earn Pueblo, cross off the list, and they're not even considered. So yeah, it's a significant issue.
There have been a lot of questions as to why wouldn't we just wait until the franchise agreement ends in 2030 before we switch to a whole different form of utility that looks like such a big change for the community. Why is it a better idea to take the off-ramp now, given the projections that it's going to take 5 to 7 years to get the new utility up and running anyway? That's a question for all of you.
Well, I would say that there is definitely a misconception there that even if we waited, Black Hills will still own the distribution, transmission, and generation. So what do we do then? We got to go through the same process. It's their assets. It's not ours, just like they bought Aquila. So why wouldn't we start now instead of waiting 10 years? So we're going to go through the same process. And the sooner we jump on this, the quicker we're going to have relief for our citizens here in Pueblo as far as electricity costs.
I would agree with that. The longer you wait, the more expensive it's going to get, because they're going to be at the commission saying, let us build more. We're going to do renewables. So you got gas generation. They're going to build all this excess capacity. And then the business community starves to death in those next 10 years. So Now's your opportunity to exercise this and throw the bums out. I mean, I just don't know why anybody has any question there. I read the Chieftain editorial that said it was not proved beyond a reasonable doubt that you would save money. Well, proof beyond a reasonable doubt is for criminal cases. But in my opinion, Black Hills has proved to me beyond a reasonable doubt that they are going to continue to screw the ratepayers in Southern Colorado because it's a part of their predatory business practice. They paid 30% premium to book for the gas utility they acquired from Source Gas. They paid 30% premium to book for the Aquila assets, which were crap assets that needed to be rebuilt. So why would they pay 30% premium to book unless they thought there was this huge opportunity to generate revenue by adding to rate base? I mean, it is so clear to me and so obvious what they're doing. I can't understand why anyone would want to stay with them.
Andrew, any comments?
Well, yeah, I agree. I mean, I think if you look at, and we'll see, I wrote an op-ed and hopefully it comes out in the Chieftain pretty soon, but, I think it boils down to a few basic things. I mean, and Francis has surely touched on the whole structure, the cost plus. If you can inflate the cost base and make 9% or so on top of that, why don't you want to just keep inflating that cost base? It's the federal and state taxes that they pay, and it's the price that they pay for power. And you group all those things together, and it makes them a very expensive utility. And then I think it's right. I mean, in business, I always want to work with people I can trust. And I think if you look at Pueblo has done some really great things for the long-term, health and growth of Pueblo. And this is really one of those things. And yeah, we're probably not going to see savings for, if it takes 5 to 7 years to do this. Savings may come in year 8 or 9, and it might be year 10 or 11. But if you just look at those 3 different areas in those baskets and you say, well, Pueblo Water does half the job that they've done with water, there should be $35 million or more of annual savings that's going to come back. And it's going to come back to, my bill at home and at work and people throughout the community. And all that money stays in there year after year. It'll let businesses invest more. It'll let people have a little bit more money in their pocket or not be so strapped. And it just makes sense.
Yeah, Pueblo mints money for South Dakota. You're a colony of South Dakota. And the other thing that has made me crazy for 3 years is these indirect costs, this corporate overhead. And I stumbled across it in the middle of the phase 1 case because there was an exhibit there that showed their indirect costs for the peaking plant that they didn't need, the $63 million peaking plant that runs 2 days a year, was almost $900,000 and the direct cost for $585,000. And I said to them, what's this about? Well, we're allocating indirect costs on the basis of the value of the asset, the undepreciated value. I said, what about allocating the indirect costs on the basis of the revenue generation 2 days a year? Well, that's not going to work for them. My guess, if I take that peaking plan of 63 million where they're soaking Pueblo with another almost $1 million a year of indirect costs, you multiply that out, I will bet you that Pueblo is paying close to $6 or $7 million a year in indirect costs that go straight up to the corporate office. Pay for the lobbyists, pay for the fireworks, pay for the foundation. And that's the other thing. I read the article in the Chieftain talking about all these great gifts that Black Hills gives: property tax, sales tax, 3% franchise fee. All of those are pass-throughs that ratepayers pay. Black Hills doesn't give you anything. Now, they throw out a few dollars from the foundation, but I will bet you, if you track where the money comes from the foundation, you're paying for a lot of that through these indirect costs that get allocated. I mean, these guys don't leave any money on the table. As my grandmother would say, they're the kind that would take the pennies off of Christ's eyes after he was crucified.
Wow. Well, and then there's the campaign. And of course, we don't know where the first 750,000 came from for Pueblo Cares, but it's widely speculated that the company might have had some involvement in that. And that gets folded into indirect costs at some level.
Of course. Oh, hey, and there's one other stunt I forgot to tell you. This happened just as I was going off the commission. They file an application, they want to give a credit to ratepayers, okay? And it's as a result of the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. And it was going to be modest for residential, I think $20, $25 a person. And for some of the corporate industrial customers, it was going to be in thousands of dollars. So before I left the commission, I was able to persuade the other two commissioners that they should not grant that just yet because we needed an explanation as to why they sat on that refund for a year. They were supposed to make that refund a year ago. Now, do you think there's anything surprising that they came to the commission in March so that it could get approved in April, right before the election? And I said when I was on the bench, there's an election going on. I am not going to put my finger on the scale to help Black Hills fight down the municipalization effort. And I would like, even though I'm not going to be here, and the other commissioners agreed, an explanation as to why they didn't make that refund earlier. And by the way, the Tax Cut and Jobs Act did result in some savings, and the commission ordered them to come up with a plan for how ratepayers were going to get it. They didn't volunteer to do that, but they were sure going to take credit of it 15 days before the election.
That is really revealing. And I think some of us suspected that that timing had something to do with this, but boy, that really nails it. Sam, let me ask. This is why
I'm saying you can't trust them. You know, you just can't. They're amazing. I mean, I am stunned at the skill that they have. But they are the Energizer vampires. Just suck it all out and send it up to South Dakota.
Sam, does passing 2A mean that this is a done deal and that Pueblo Water will definitely become the electric utility? And I think, a related question there is what if the costs of acquiring Black Hills become too costly? As we all know, those costs ultimately will be determined by the courts, condemnation court, and also by the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission on the question of stranded costs and going concern. But talk about what this vote really means. I mean, is this like the ultimate decision, or is this a first step in a long process?
Well, I would say that there definitely is some misinformation out there that if this passes, hopefully that Black Hills is out and this is too risky and electrical grid's going to cave in Pueblo. What the vote's going to allow us to do is continue this process of investigating what it's going to take over this region is from Black Hills. Black Hills, after May 5th, if this passes, they'll continue to be our electric utility until we go through the courts and that process. But all throughout this, we're going to be evaluating, what the acquisition costs are going to be on an ongoing basis. And in addition to getting our neighbors in all directions in Black Hills area to come on board as in a distribution cooperative kind of authority to where we can get Canyon City involved and Florence and out east and get everybody involved in that respect. And then look at the generation, setting up a generation authority so we can buy power on the open market to make this work out. So I think it's very low risk, and it's promoted as being too risky, but I don't see that at all. They're just allowing us to continue down this path.
And Sam and Andrew both, a listener asks, what would your company do with the substantial savings in its electric costs?
Well, I think substantial savings in electric costs would be wonderful because it would free up, resources to use to invest. And, investing for us is usually, some new equipment, maybe a slightly different area that we haven't been involved in, which usually means hiring more people and growing. And so I think that's what we'd probably do at TR Toppers.
Sam, anything you'd like to add to that?
Well, I think it's real similar to Andrew. We would focus on growth. I mean, we're doing that now, but that would just allow us so much more capital to continue to grow. And it wouldn't be a burden on us to hopefully, we can partner with other companies to get them to come to Pueblo so we can create a bigger manufacturing base. And, manufacturing is not dead. We're alive and well. And I think this whole COVID crisis is going to bring even more back to the United States. And we'd love to be on the front line to receive those new companies. And with lower rates, it's going to be a lot better, an easier negotiating spot than we are now. And I know Andrew talked a bit about the economic development. I was on the PEDCO Economic Development Council for 12 years plus. And for sure, electrical rates was a big discussion point. And I can tell you in those meetings, I was cringing when they'd bring that up because yeah, we can tout about cheap gas and cheap water, but when it comes to electrical rates, there's only so much you can say. So you got to tout the cost of living and the great people here that live in Pueblo. And they're really, if we can get a company here, they're very impressed with the community. But it's the numbers people that make the decisions also. So, and that's where the electrical rates come in heavily.
Francis, here's an interesting question coming in from a listener about the campaign. This person asks, are there any PUC regulations that could protect Pueblo residents from Black Hill's lies in this campaign? And then associated with that, is there any kind of regulation limiting or prohibiting the use of Black Hill's ratepayer provided revenues from the costly misinformation campaign that they're waging against Pueblo's interest in this campaign?
There is no regulation that can prohibit them from lying. The commission's issued a couple of orders, and that doesn't seem to have had an edifying effect on their chief regulatory officer, although he is retiring. I take some credit for that. With respect to, can they put this into their next rate case? That's more problematic for them. If they've got a brain in their head, they won't do that, but I've not seen them be very wise in the past. Normally what they would do for something like this, in the Boulder case, the commission would not allow public service in their rate case to put those expenses in. They had to run those at the corporate level. So my guess is you would see them do it at the corporate level, but that's why you need good commission staff, because it's not easy to ferret it out.
Yeah, okay, well, thank you. There's some comments coming in from Penrose and Fremont County, who are very much our partners in this undertaking, saying they've been learning the hard way just how low-handed Black Hills can be with land grabbing and threatening eminent domain, all the while saying that the PUC approved everything for them to proceed. Yeah, so the power line is definitely risen to be an associated issue. Well, we've been at this for an hour. It's been a fabulous conversation. We've touched on you all have touched on many really important issues that I think only you can address with this level of understanding. Let's give you a chance to have some closing comments. Anything you'd like to add that hasn't been addressed by the questions or you haven't had a chance to say as the hour has gone along? Andrew, you want to kick it off?
Sure. I think maybe a couple things. I want to talk, and Francis did a good job talking about Boulder, but that just keeps coming up over and over. And I think, if you break it down to 3 or 4 things that are substantially different in Pueblo than in Boulder, one is that, they spent 4 or 5 years battling the PUC over jurisdiction. They have it, and we'll proceed, and we don't need to waste that time right off the bat. And then, they set up this, it's been called a paper utility, where they're essentially staffing the utility and paying them high wages for year after year. And with Pueblo Water, you don't need to do that. They've got that expertise. And so they'll be there with the expertise already in place. And so you don't have to spend money on that. And then the other thing that's, much more of a problem in Boulder is that the way it was set up is that you'd have to, split up substations and things to align the new distribution network with the city limits. And the approach I think that Pueblo's taken and Pueblo Water to take the whole Black Hills service area avoids most of that problem. So, that's another big one. I think, it's not, you see this government takeover argument, and I'd almost say it's kind of the opposite of that. It's bringing it back to local community control, and there won't be the PUC involvement down the road. And so I think it's important. It's important to draw those distinctions between Pueblo and Boulder. And then I think just closing, I've been thinking about it, and when I hear all these ads on TV and see the ads in the newspaper, it kind of makes my blood boil. And it's just really irritating that all these statements are just so misleading. And then you start to think about it, and you ask yourself, why do you not see the leadership of Black Hills in the community, speaking to different clubs, social organizations, panels like this, and showing their face day after day and pitching their product, their service? Because anything I've ever been involved in that's worth it, you believe in the mission, you believe in the facts, and you're out there, promoting it. So I think that the problem is they've totally outsourced this. And, I would say because, they can't come with a straight face to the people of Pueblo and tell you what a good deal that we have with Black Hills and what a good deal we'll have in the future. I'd love when you raise your rates for years and years, and then you're bold enough to say, we're not gonna, cut your rates. I mean, come on, it's absurd. But I think, if they had a good pitch and the facts were on their side, you'd see their leadership, but you don't. You see them outsourcing it. And then I guess the closing thing for me is the fact I moved here almost 20 years ago. Love the way Pueblo has taken on big things, whether it's founding Pedco and getting more business and more jobs for people when, the steel mill took a turn, whether it's building the Riverwalk, the RTA, bringing football back to the university, all these kind of things that were big multi-year things that really for the long term, Pueblo will make it a better place. And I think this is one of those things. It has to be looked that way. It's not going to be easy. It's going to take a few years. But I think about the risk of if we don't do it. And I think it makes all the sense in the world that we move ahead with municipalization of electric utility.
Great. Thank you very much. Sam?
Well, I don't think I can top that, Andrew. That's a great summary of what's going on here. And
I bet you can.
I don't think so. I appreciate all those comments, but if I do want to touch on the government takeover, I think that is kind of a joke. If I look back when I first got out of college, I worked for a aerospace manufacturer, defense contractor, and I was an industrial engineer. And, we're focused on process improvement and cost reductions. And it didn't take me more than a few months to realize that I wasn't really needed there, and I couldn't figure out why they hired me. But they were in an industry where it truly was cost plus. And the reason that kind of was developed, right or wrong, is when they were developing the aerospace program, there was a lot of unknowns, and the government needed to fund it and let these people keep on going. So they established this cost plus, and they don't call it that anymore, but that's how it works. The more cost you have, the higher the profit. And that's the exact model that's been described. Francis described it to a T, that Black Hills is using as a business model. And it's been great for their investors and their management. And they've done a great job with that, but not for the people of Pueblo. So it's a model that I would be embarrassed to be involved with. We're in a customer-driven business, and we got to perform, and we got to make sure that the assets we buy and put into use, that we got to be able to pay for those with reduced cost to our customers. We can't raise rates. We'd be down the road. We wouldn't be in business. So it's a totally different approach. But I can see why they did it, because they were allowed to do that, which is crazy that something like that could happen. So, but beyond that, I'm excited for this to pass. I'm on the board of Waterworks, and this is something that I didn't plan on having on my plate when I signed in January 1st or whatever the date was. But for the $210 a month that I get, I'm going to put everything I got into it. So, and I jokingly say that because there's obviously a lot of work to do with this, and the staff at the Board of Waterworks, they're up for the task. We have all the systems in place to run a utility, because that's what the Pueblo Board of Waterworks is doing. You know, if people haven't checked, you know, we're 32% lower than the state average, which Front Range average, which is unbelievable. So, you know, the Board of Waterworks could have raised rates, but they're locally run, locally elected officials, and they didn't do that. I mean, they've done it to you know, to adjust the cost of living expenses and cost of running the operation, but we're still substantially lower than the Front Range. So that's something we need to be proud of. So I'm very proud that I'm involved with the Board of Waterworks, and I think that if there's one organization that can make this happen, that's the organization. And I think if you look back of why these things fail, it's because we didn't have a focus group, or the other communities didn't have a focus group. It might have been with city council, and they run, you know, they have different elections and different viewpoints every few years. So that's a tough thing to take on such a big task, and you know, with consistency. So that's what the Board of Waterworks provides, is that consistency for us to see this through till the end. And I think everybody on the staff is excited about it. I think all the board members are excited about it, and so am I. So it's going to be a great thing for Pueblo.
That's great to hear you say. I think that perspective on the Board of Waterworks and their readiness for this undertaking is important for all of us in the community to really understand. Well, Frances, I think the last word is yours. So,
Okay.
Breeze.
Well, I do like Vance Crocker. He and I would have good meetings. I told him if he was successful in keeping me from getting a second term, I was his worst nightmare, because I was looking forward before coronavirus to traveling down to Pueblo and debating this with him. And I would even look forward to debating this with Steve Welshert, whom I've known for years, who's running their campaign, because I don't think they could answer the questions that I have. I don't think they could justify some of the cheating that they've done, some of the sneakiness that they've done, and how they've damaged the working class down in Pueblo and the businesses. So local control, I agree, is really important. You know, I like to think that the PUC is not political, but that's not quite true. It is driven in some respects by a Denver-centric agenda. It is driven in many respects by what the sitting governor wants or needs. And Pueblo gets sacrificed in all that. It's only 94,000 ratepayers, 94,000 voters. The 1.5 million is with public service. So local control is important. And let me leave these citizens who might be listening with this thought. There's this old adage that was actually apparently attributed to an Italian, this saying in 1635. Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. And Pueblo has an opportunity to stand up for itself. And if they don't, this company is going to continue to suck the economic life out of that community.
Okay, fantastic closings from all of you. Well, I just want to thank you once again, all three of you, for a really stimulating discussion, and with the focus, it's been a broad focus on the regulatory role of the PUC, on the dynamics, the macroeconomic dynamics of the business community, and what you've been facing as business owners to try to deal with this over a series of years. It's really been fabulous. And I also want to thank our viewers and our community partners and friends for joining in, for submitting questions, and for participating in this. I want you to know we have one more Friday night on Speaking Truth About Power. And our guest next week, I think that's May the 1st, Friday night, 7 p.m., same station. Our guest will be Danae Esgar, State Representative, County Commissioner Terry Hart, and Seth Clayton, the Director of the Water Board, who will talk about the new utility and the importance of it and how it will move forward. I don't encourage you to hold on to your ballot until after that session. I encourage you to vote yes on 2A and put it in the ballot box tomorrow morning. But next week's session, regardless, will be another stimulating one and another chance to hear from so many of our community leaders who understand the opportunity that's embedded in this proposal and strongly advocate it and stand ready to work hand in hand with the new utility once this is passed. So thanks once again to everybody. It's been a great conversation. Hope you have a great weekend. Stay safe, keep sheltering. See you next week.